Hey Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks very much for joining me today. I thought I would just check in and let you guys know how I've been doing with my blue-green Merfolk list. It looks a lot different from where I was at with my deck tech. I feel like it was about a month ago, right after Ixalan was released. So at this point, I've just been playing a lot of modern queues, not really bothering with leagues right now because I'm literally changing the numbers in the deck after every single match. I have things in the back of my head that I'm sort of testing, and after a given match, maybe I drew too many of this card or not enough of that card. And so yeah, I've been testing for about a month and didn't like Metallic Mimic as much as I initially thought. While it's pretty good in the early part of the game, as a top deck, it doesn't have the effect that we want of buffing all of our creatures right away, like our more typical Merfolk lords do, like Merrow Reejerey, Master of the Pearl Trident, etc. So Metallic Mimics are out. Actually, in this build right now, I don't have any Smuggler's Copters. It's very similar in the sense that it still has a super low curve. I've got the 1-drop creatures, a lot of 2-drop creatures, and just a couple of Reejereys, because I did want more lords. At this point, I've got the 10 lords, 4, 4, and 2. I am including 2 Phantasmal Images. A bunch of you guys asked me about this card, and my response at the beginning of the month was that I really don't like it. I've played it in the past and thought it was too swingy. It could be really terrible if you get stranded with just a couple of these in your hand and say after a board wipe and you can't really copy anything. It's not applying any pressure, but with so many creatures, exactly half the deck is creatures in this build. There's pretty much always something for a Phantasmal Image to copy. I mean, it can even copy a Mutavault in a pinch. So Phantasmal Image is great with the Reejereys in the deck because you guys probably know this, but copying Reejerey, having multiple Reejereys on the table is a pretty good way to just end a game immediately. You can use it to untap your lands and put all your creatures out, untap AEther Vial, put your creatures out that way, tap down all your opponent's blockers if you don't have access to Island Walk. So yeah, Phantasmal Image, most powerful, I think, copying the Reejerey, but it's fantastic if you Vial it in. So I should just say, Phantasmal Image works really, really well with Vial because you always keep Vial on 2, and when you activate the Vial, your opponent's just sort of like, yeah, whatever. So they're not really thinking that they have to bolt your creature in response to Vial or fatal push your creature in response to Vial. And once Vial resolves, Phantasmal Image is on the table, and it will get to copy your creature. Your opponent can't say you only have 1 Silvergill on the table, and you Vial in Phantasmal Image. Once Vial resolves, Phantasmal Image is on the board, and it has entered as the creature that you want it to copy. So if you have a single Silvergill Adept out on the table, and you flash in this Phantasmal Image, you're going to get to draw a card, and you're going to have another Silvergill Adept. So Phantasmal Image works really well, kind of sneaky with AEther Vial. So I've been enjoying having 2 copies of this. Again, because it's such a swingy card, and you don't really know what you're going to have on the table at any moment, so he can be better or worse. I think 2 is a good number. I don't really like running 4. I just feel like it introduces too much variance. A couple other things. I'm on 6 1-drop creatures. I feel like running 4 and 4 is too much. And some lists have been cutting Cursecatcher entirely. And I think that's pretty hasty. Cursecatcher wins me games still. I mean, people just, for whatever reason, they choose to ignore the games that Cursecatcher wins. Like, he doesn't actually do a good job a lot of the time. But he really does. He does a lot of good stuff. I was playing against Blue Steel. The opponent attacked me in the air and got me down to 4 life and tried to Psionic Blast me. So I Vialed in a Cursecatcher and countered it, and then I won on the next turn. I think, yeah, it was pretty awesome. Anyhow, Cursecatcher, you guys know, he pushes back Anger of the Gods, counters early game garbage like Lightning Helixes and things like that, Helices. So anyhow, I'm on 3 Cursecatcher and 3 Kumena Speaker. One of them is just a beater, does a really good job of it. The other one is a tempo card, does a good job of that. So 8's too many, 4's too little. I like having 6 1-drops, feels really good. 4 C's, as I mentioned. I don't think I mentioned this yet. I'm running 3 Spell Pierce right now. In game 1, with all these creatures and the low curve, we want to establish a board and maintain the board and attack a few times and win. Spell Pierce helps us do that. A lot of times in games 2 and 3, when we're running the counter magic plan out of the sideboard. You know, we're really careful with our counter spells. Like, we want to wait for a big spell in order to use the counter spell, but Spell Pierce quickly loses its value, right? It's an early game spell because it taxes the opponent too, and we don't want them to be able to pay that. So if the opponent goes to bolt a Merfolk Branchwalker, you know, we might Spell Pierce that just to maintain our clock and push the win in game 1. It's possible, you know, in some matchups we might take Spell Pierce out for games 2 and 3, like say Humans, which is getting really popular right now. They really don't run a lot of non-creature spells. So we might sideboard out Spell Pierce, but then again, they probably bring in some non-creature spells. So we might consider keeping Spell Pierce in, but I think that's a matchup where it probably comes out. But against most of the modern format, Spell Pierce does a really, really good job. So I love having it in hand. And so 3 feels correct. 4 would be too many. I think that 2 is just a little bit less than I want. So I'm back up to 3 right now. Playsets of the things you'd expect, 4 Silvergills, 4 Harbingers. Now, as you guys as many of us started messing around with blue-green Merfolk, some people trimmed some number of Harbinger of the Tides to make space for some new cards. And that's really not intelligent, I don't think. We really want 4 Harbingers. Modern is an extremely creature-centric, creature-oriented format. And Harbinger does so much work against so many decks, whether it's like a Griselbrand deck, you bounce Griselbrand, get him back in the opponent's hand. Now he has to get him back in the graveyard and then reanimate him again. If the opponent's playing Dredge, they've gotten something in the graveyard, and the Prized Amalgam comes back to the battlefield, tapped, just bounce him with Harbinger of the Tides. You got Monodorks, bounce the Monodorks. You've got Vault Scourges, bounce the Vault Scourge. So Harbinger of the Tides does so much work against pretty much every deck. You really want to keep 4 in. We don't have a lot of interaction in our deck. So Harbinger is a key piece in the deck because it's both a creature that can work at instant speed even without AEther Vial, and its interaction. So you want to keep all 4 of these guys. Of course, I've got 4 and 4 of the Island Walk Lords, and a full playset of the Branchwalker. This card is sensational. Almost all the time, you want to play it ahead of Silvergill, because if it doesn't have a land on the top, you can either keep it there or throw it away. And if you've got a Silvergill in hand and you like the card, then you can go ahead and play the Silvergill and draw it. If you don't like the card, you wouldn't have wanted to draw it with Silvergill Adept. So Merfolk Branchwalker doing a good job of scrying away garbage. Also, you wanted to hit the table sooner because frequently it enters the battlefield as a 3/2, and you want that higher power on the table sooner to start beating down. So really, really strong. Loving this card. Totally reasonable to play, and correct, I think, to play the full play set. All right, over here, I think I was on 18 lands at the beginning of the month, but at that point I had no 3-drops and was just starting to test the deck. After testing a bunch, 18 lands felt just a touch too low. I was getting screwed a little bit too often, keeping too many hands with AEther Vial in 1 land. So I'm up to 19 lands. One important thing to discuss is I'm on 2 Mutavaults. Now, somebody on Reddit told me that if playing blue-green Merfolk means you can only run 2 Mutavaults, then blue-green Merfolk is a bad idea, because Mutavault is such a good card. And while I agree that Mutavault is a very, very good card, I have it in the deck. Obviously, I think it's a good card. In a 2-color deck that runs 19 lands, having 4 colorless man lands is not a good idea. Especially if you're running a ton of Cavern of Souls. Like a couple of the lists that did really well at Star City Games events recently are running these mana bases where they have Cavern of Souls and the new card that's sort of like Cavern of Souls, but I can't think of the name right now. And they only have like 2 islands or 2 breeding pools or something like that. And you know, you're going to get screwed when it comes time to cast Spreading Seas and you need blue mana. You want to cast Dispel or Ceremonious Rejection or Natural State. And, you know, you need regular colored mana for these things. So I found in my testing that 4 Mutavaults was just too much. To sort of explain the theory of running 2 a little bit more directly, if you run a playset of anything, you've got a pretty good chance of drawing it in your opening hand, right? The best possible chance of drawing in your opening hand is when you run a playset of something. If you run 3 of something, you wouldn't be surprised if you saw it in your opening hand. But then again, I don't think it's not like 50% or something. You're definitely not favored to have a particular 3 of in your opening hand. But when you go down to 2, it becomes much more unlikely that you would have that particular card in your opening 7. And Mutavault is strictly not a card that you want in your opening 7 if you think about it in this deck. We don't want to block with Mutavault early. We don't want to really activate it and swing with it early because of Fatal Push and because of Lightning Bolt and because of Path to Exile. Mutavault is more of a late game card for us. It's a turn 4 card if we're attacking for the win. It's a turn 8 card if we're playing against control and they've wiped our board and we're trying to attack with Mutavault. On turns 1, 2, and 3, all we want is lands that have blue and green mana. Island is okay, cast most of the stuff in the deck. Cavern of Souls is great, cast all the creatures. Breeding Pool, any fetch land, got some Flooded Strand, some Polluted Deltas, some Misty Rainforest. Any of these are great, and you can see I've got a lot of them. But you do not want Mutavault in your opening hand because it doesn't help cast any of our 1-drops, and it doesn't help us cast a ton of our 2-drops. It does help out with some of our 2-drops if we have another colored source. But imagine a hand where you have something like a Botanical Sanctum and an AEther Vial. That's pretty solid, especially if you're on the draw, because if you've mulliganed once, you get a scry. If you haven't, you still have a couple of draw steps if you're on the draw before it comes time to actually play a 2-drop, and you've already got a Vial on the table. So Botanical Sanctum with AEther Vial is an easy keep, I think. Mutavault AEther Vial, on the other hand, is really, really sketchy, right? Because if you don't have any colored sources in your opening hand, you're really far away from hard casting your double blue spells. You're pretty far away from being able to cast any of your green stuff. If the opponent has some answer to AEther Vial and you just have a single Mutavault as your land, it's really terrible. So I think you guys get it. In my opinion, this list with running fewer than 20 lands and having to support 2 colors, we should trim the Mutavaults. So let me know if you guys agree with me on that. Again, in my testing, I just found I was drawing way too many Mutavaults, and the theory behind it, again, I think makes sense that as a 2 of, you'll draw it more often in games that go really long, which is when we want Mutavault. You really don't want it at the beginning. So going to the sideboard, got 5 3-ofs. We've got Ceremonious Rejection, Dispel, Dismember, Natural State, and Relic of Progenitus. These are all... it has to be pretty similar to the sideboard that I was running at the beginning of the month. But having just done the metagame analysis, I saw that Affinity and Eldrazi are sort of at the tippy top of the format right now. So having 6 spells between Ceremonious Rejection and Natural State that deal with colorless things seems like a good plan. Dismember, also a ton of help against Affinity and Eldrazi, but also every other creature deck in the format, including the newly popular Humans deck. Dispel, all around sort of all-star, great against Storm, which is, I think, one of the 3 top decks up there with Affinity and Eldrazi. So Dispel can slow down Storm in conjunction with Relic of Progenitus. Dismember, also great against Storm. It can kill their cost-reducing creatures like Baral and Electromancer. So nice, well-rounded sideboard that can address a lot of different decks, from spell strategies to creature strategies to graveyard strategies. The metagame analysis I just did, there were 6 events this month, big SCG events between classics and opens, and let's see. And there were 25 different decks in 48 top 8 spots, right? So 6 events times 8 is 48 top 8 spots, and there are 25 different decks. Only 3 decks placed in the top 8 more than 3 times. That means there was I think there was something like 20 decks that only made top 8 once. So a lot of unique decks showed up and just killed it and made top 8, which means that Modern is super diverse, and I think pretty much every month it just gets more diverse as people discover new synergies. They discover new cards. Like in the Humans deck, this freebooter. It's like a 1/2 flyer that can, it's kind of like Tide Hollow Sculler. It can take away, I think, an instant or a sorcery, or it's a non-creature, I think, from the opponent's hand until the freebooter dies. That card looked great on camera. So it's a central part of this really successful new humans list. So again, Modern's getting more and more diverse. And so we really need a sideboard that addresses a really broad range of strategies. Just because we're weak to affinity doesn't mean we should just run 4 natural states. Right? We hate Ensnaring Bridge, right? Sure, but we don't have the space to run 4 natural states. Maybe you might want to run 4 Dismembers, but again, you need to be well-rounded. So I feel like the sideboard's been doing a great job. I'm really liking the main deck. I'm winning way more often than I'm losing. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and have a look at this replay that I wanted to show you guys. All right. So this replay is using the exact deck list that I just showed you. I won the die roll, so I'll be on the play. And this is a dangerous keep here, right? We have a ton of double blue, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about with running Mutavaults. If this Mutavault was another blue source, this would be a total snap keep, like really picture-perfect Merfolk opening hand. But the Mutavault makes it super sketchy because if I go 3 turns or something without drawing another blue source, I'm going to lose the game. But it's good enough. It's got turn 1 pressure with Speaker. Follow up with a Mutavault, and we have a lot of live draws. We can hit a Spreading Seas that we could cast off of these lands. We can cast a Silvergill. We could cast a Merfolk Branchwalker. We could play a Cursecatcher. We could play another Kumena Speaker. We could play an AEther Vial with these hands. So we've got a ton of live draws. The only thing that we don't want to see right now is basically another Mutavault or any more double blue spells. So I actually feel favored for this hand to develop positively, and I decided to keep. I was pretty worried, especially since I'm on the play, but the opponent kept as well. I'm going to play my Botanical Sanctum and Kumena Speaker. Now this guy is just a 1/1 right now. And I should mention that another reason to run the Fetch Shock mana base as opposed to the Cavern of Souls mana base in our tribal deck is that we really want islands to make sure that Kumena Speaker is always a 2/2. If you're just running a ton of Cavern of Souls and the opponent's removing your creatures, Kumena Speaker is going to be a 1/1 more often than with this mana base. So passing the turn to the opponent. Let's see what they're playing. Basic Island means possibly the Mirror, but at least they didn't have an AEther Vial. So first draw step on turn 2, I hit my blue source, which I was ecstatic about, obviously. So I think the play here is basically go grab an island. I should mention this now while I'm using a fetch land. I have been seeing a lot of Blood Moon lately. So with all these fetches, I've been playing pretty well around it, getting islands in the early part of the game. And if I know I'm playing against Blood Moon, I bring in all 3 natural states, as well as the 3 spell pierces that I have in the main. And between those, I've felt pretty good so far about playing against Blood Moon, especially with AEther Vial. If we've got an AEther Vial, we're pretty much good to go, because we'll be able to get our green guys on the board, even with a Blood Moon resolved. If we don't have an AEther Vial resolved, we have to draw into an AEther Vial, play it, and then tick it up in order to get our green creatures out, which is kind of a pain in the butt. And we can't cast a natural state once a Blood Moon has resolved. So what you want to do is keep green mana up on the turn when you think the opponent might slam a Blood Moon. When the Blood Moon is on the stack, float the green mana, let the Blood Moon resolve, and then cast natural state and destroy it. But as I mentioned, as long as you're fetching islands early, and you're playing some spell pierces in the deck, you shouldn't feel too terrible against Blood Moon. So now that I have an island, you can see Kumena Speaker is already a 2/2. I think it's time to just jam a Lord here. We don't usually run them out so early, but this hand pretty much looks like that's what we want to do. So it's not Merfolk. We're playing against a control deck. He had a Spell Snare for turn 1, which is pretty rough for us. But if we could have resolved that Lord, it was correct to run it out in the first main so that we could have pushed 1 more point of damage. but we're still going to get in for 2 with Kumena Speaker. And you can see the value of this little guy. A 2/2 1-drop, even without a Lord. So there's a Flooded Strand. Looks like the opponent's leaving up more counter magic. The AEther Vial was a great rip. My top decks have been developing nicely. So I just went to combat here. I wanted to sort of suss out what the opponent was doing with this mana that he has up. If he has a removal spell, I'd rather him pop the Kumena Speaker than my Lord. All right, so down to 17, down to 15. All right, so he's doing some of the work for me. And it's obviously Jeskai at this point, which is becoming more popular again. And I think it's a pretty decent matchup for Merfolk, so sort of happy about that development in the metagame, that Jeskai is becoming more popular again. Spell Queller is a really obnoxious card, and you really want AEther Vial if you're playing against a Spell Queller deck. But we see the opponent's bolting the Kumena Speaker, which is totally fine with me. It might mean that he has a lot of removal in hand, and he doesn't mind burning that on a 1-drop. But I'm going to go ahead here and just run out Harbinger, I think. It's a body, and then I'll run out AEther Vial. Now, I don't know if the opponent had another Spell Snare. Probably not, because you've got to take your spots where you can get them with Spell Snare, and if the opponent had it, he probably would have countered the Harbinger. But it's possible that as a low priority creature, the opponent didn't want to waste the Spell Snare. Either way, we've got a body on the table. We now have a Mutavault, and this AEther Vial is going to be very helpful. So a tap Celestial Colonnade. That would have been a turn where the opponent could have slammed Blood Moon, which I was a little bit afraid of, but seeing all these non-basics, I don't think this is going to be a Blood Moon deck. They need their colors too much. So we're going to tick AEther Vial up, and Botanical Sanctum, not the best draw. We don't really want lands in this spot, right? So let's just activate Mutavault and go to town. If the opponent has a Bolt, let's make him use it on something other than a Lord. If he has a Path, I mean, I don't mind replacing Mutavault with an island. Blue-green Merfolk wants to win fast. It's a little bit different than the strategy in mono-blue. All right, so there's the path to exile. I'm going to go ahead and get an island out of my deck. Comes in tapped. The opponent's still going to take 2, and we're doing a good job chipping their life total down. Next turn, we will be able to take AEther Vial up to 2 and start playing things on the opponent's end step. So, turn 4 for the opponent. He passes without playing a land, and seeing a control deck miss a land drop is always very exciting. On the one hand, it means that they have gas in their hand, right? If you have no lands, then they've got a lot of gas, but control decks need a lot of land to turn on Celestial Colonnade, and generally they just need lands to make a lot of things happen in one turn. Like they want to cast things like Snapcaster or Cryptic Command, right? So that's 6 mana that play, and the opponent here is stuck on 3 mana. Okay, so Harbinger's not great in the matchup, but I've got 4 mana here, so I can cast him at instant speed, and I've got AEther Vial up. So I think we just go to attacks here. There's really no reason to run out the Lords into all this open mana. Now, the opponent could, like, Snapcaster, Lightning Bolt or something. What's happening here? So Helix, there's nothing we can do about that. But again, if we had played a Lord, the opponent would have just cast Helix on the Lord. So very happy just to have the Harbinger eat this right now. So we'll say okay, and then since the opponent is down to just 1 island, I think I'm going to try to just play a Lord of Atlantis here. All right, so missing another land drop. This can only be good for us. I think I'm not going to bring anything in on the end step. No reason to overextend. The opponent's stuck on 3 lands, which means that if he's got something like Electrolyze, we have Lord with AEther Vial in response. If he has Bolt or Snap Bolt, there's nothing we can really do about that anyway. So we're trying to play around Supreme Verdict. We're not sure which build of Jeskai the guy's on, more tempo-oriented or a more control-oriented. Cursecatcher is decent, I guess. We can play that guy out, and maybe the opponent will play something. Let's see. So just a Bolt. Yeah, nothing we could do about that. So I think I just play the Cursecatcher and pass the turn. So opponent's got to path the Cursecatcher. Maybe there's something that he really wants to resolve in his hand. But I'm happy trading a Cursecatcher for a path. All right. Here's a Serum Vision. Let's go ahead and open the chat and see what he does with the Scries. So top and top. That's a little bit frightening. The opponent currently sitting on 4 cards. We're sitting on 2, and he still didn't have a land drop to make. Again, we can just put the Harbinger in here. Not the most valuable creature in the matchup, so let's just try to get some damage in with it. So Spreading Seas is very nice. I think we'll go ahead and attack now. If you try to Spreading Seas before combat and the opponent has a removal spell, they're just going to cast the removal spell in response to Spreading Seas. So better to wait on the Spreading Seas. Doesn't have split second or anything. The opponent can always respond. They're stuck on mana, and so we really would like to resolve Spreading Seas. So let's make them tap their mana to remove the Harbinger. But they don't, and he gets in for 2, so that's value. And let's go for this red mana. Now, the opponent's really far away from activating Celestial Colonnade. Typically, we hit the man lands, but we see they're behind on lands. They did top with their Serum Vision, so it's probably a land on the top. But Spreading Sea is still great here. It's going to draw us a card and slow down their mana. Now that's really great. One of my 3 main deck Spell Pierces, because with the opponent stuck on lands, Spell Pierce is still live even on turn 7. And of course, these tempo/control Jeskai strategies run a lot of instants and sorceries that Spell Pierce can target. So again, being very patient, not running out Lord of Atlantis yet. Let's make Harbinger do as much work as he can. We'll keep Aether Vial on 2, and another Aether Vial, not the best draw. So the opponent is short on lands, but we're a little heavy on lands here. Lands and Aether Vials. So what's the opponent going for here? So I think he's going for Snapcaster Lightning Bolt. Cracking his fetch land. Now this is, again, nice because the opponent just cost himself 3 life to crack that fetch land and get a shock. So at this point, I think the opponent, let's see, he floats a red mana, and what's happening here is a little bit strange, the timing. Before we go to blocks, before he has a chance to go to blocks, I want to activate my Aether Vial and bring in Lord of Atlantis. In response, the opponent's going to try to bolt the Harbinger. Now, I have Spell Pierce, and again, Spell Pierce loses value rapidly. The opponent is now making his land drops, so let's use this while we can. It's going to effectively counter the Lightning Bolt, and we'll get to put our Lord in for 3 more damage. So we actually got 6 points on the opponent this turn between his Fetch Shock and the Island Walk. Harbinger. Now, there's really no reason to keep the Aether Vial in our hand, so we might as well just get it out. Play around any counter spells the opponent might have. And yeah, there's that extra land drop. That was probably the second scry from the Serum Visions. Now, the opponent has 3 cards in hand, 5 lands, and a Snapcaster, which is a scary spot for us, but we've been doing a decent job, even through a Lightning Helix, of chipping the opponent's life total down. So we are going to tick up our Aether Vial. Now, a creature was a great draw. We wanted anything other than Aether Vial and land there. I think I'm just going to pass here, because with 3 cards, there's too many combinations where the opponent can like bolt and block, in which case we're back to sort of square one. If he has a bolt here, let him take care of the Lord, but at least I still have a creature on the table in the event that I draw another Lord down the road that can attack with Island Walk. Opponent's tapping some stuff here, thinking better of it. Okay, so here's a Spell Queller. That would have been a really good blocker. Say the opponent has a bolt in hand, he could bolt the Lord and then just eat my Harbinger with the 2/3 Spell Queller. So very happy that I chose not to attack there. And again, being passive makes the opponent a little bit more aggressive. They might not be afraid of what I have in hand, but if I end step Kumena Speaker, suddenly I've got a pretty threatening board going into the next turn. And it makes a lot of top decks live with Vials going up to 3 and 2 for me to draw another Lord and just present a lot of damage that the opponent might not be able to deal with. So getting in with Spell Queller here. Let's see. I like that he's tapping lands here. I'd rather not be facing down a lot of untapped lands on my turn. So there is a Geist of Saint Trapped. Still has red lands up. Could have access to another Bolt, potentially just a Snapcaster as an Ambush Viper. Geist presents the threat of a lot of damage in the air, but we can usually just block and trade with that guy, so we're not that afraid of him, especially when we have access to Island Walk. So I'm going to bluff this here. It's a little bit silly, but sometimes when you activate Aether Vial, the opponent will flash in Vendilion Click. Now, he doesn't have Vendilion Click mana here, but it's something to look out for. If I activated the Kumena Speaker, the Aether Vial on 1 to put in Kumena Speaker, the opponent, if he had 3 mana, flash in Vendilion Click, ship this away, maybe I draw a land or something. So let's bluff with 2. It's, again, a little bit silly because the opponent doesn't have 3 mana up, and we might have gotten a response out of him on his turn rather than our turn to know what he has in his hand. But he didn't respond, which makes me feel a little bit better. The opponent we saw was pretty hair trigger when I activated the Aether Vial previously with the Spell Pierce in hand. He went for the Lightning Bolt with Aether Vial on the stack. So if he had a Bolt and I activate Aether Vial, maybe he would spend his Bolt right away. That way I sort of understand what he's working with a little bit better. Anyhow, he might have done it in response to this one if I activated that first as well, I'm not sure. But the fact that he didn't bolt anything in response after having bolted something on the previous turn makes me think that he might not have it, in which case we might be looking to attack this turn. I am going to tick both of these up in the event that I draw a Lord. And we did. So I think I'm just going to attack with everything. Not push Island Walk yet with the Lord of Atlantis. Let the opponent try to block. Okay, so going for the Snapcaster block. Let's see. I'm going to activate Aether Vial, bring in the other Island Walk Lord. Now, what would happen here if the opponent did have a bolt would be that he would bolt this guy, which would stink, and then this guy would trade with Snapcaster, and I would still be pushing 6 damage here, putting him down to 2, which is pretty solid. If I draw another Island Walk Lord, he's going to be really low on removal, and I can try to just close things out on the next turn. Let's see. But I am in top deck mode at this point. So the opponent did not have that bolt. It was a good read with the Aether Vials. And yeah, it was a little bit precarious, that situation. We never really want to get down to 0 cards, but we drew exactly what we wanted with Master of the Pearl Trident. And as I said, I had a read on the opponent that he didn't respond with a bolt to my Aether Vial, so it seemed like it was time to go all in before the opponent had a chance to leverage some pretty powerful card advantage spells like Sphinx's Revelation or anything like that. Maybe a Johnny Vengeant could take things the opponent's way. So that was the first game. We managed to get there. The blue-green Merfolk. Look away for a second if you don't want to see the match result. I'm going to click out now. All right, so I'm back with game 2. The opponent will be on the play this time. An excellent opening hand. I love seeing that Spell Pierce. All right, so Sacred Foundry untapped, going down to 18 against the aggressive Merfolk deck. Very interesting. Seems like he wants to bolt something, possibly a Cursecatcher to resolve an important turn 2 spell. But I won't be dissuaded. I'm going to play my Cursecatcher here. But first, I'm going to go and get a Breeding Pool. This Jeskai deck doesn't pressure my life total, so I'm not that afraid of going down to 17 in this spot. It will turn on Kumena Speaker, since it's an island. But I'll run out Cursecatcher right now, rather than leaving up Spell Pierce. So as I said, the opponent had the Lightning Bolt, and he seemed to want to cast it on turn 1 against Cursecatcher. So if I go, for example, for a creature here, and the opponent counters it, the Cursecatcher could have countered their counter. So potentially a good play for them to bolt this guy. Let's see what the opponent actually is working with. So Aether Vial was a great draw there. Another great draw would have been Cavern of Souls, which would have let me cast my creatures through any counter magic. The opponent could potentially have something like a Lightning Helix as well, which the Cursecatcher would have been able to counter if I played a bigger creature like a Silvergill or a Branchwalker or a Lord. But in this spot, I can now play out AEther Vial, which you guys know is going to sort of free up my mana as the game goes longer. It's going to get my creatures onto the table so that they can counter it, and I'll be able to leave up mana for my Spell Pierce this turn. So an excellent draw. We'll play the AEther Vial and pass the turn with Breeding Pool up. The opponent did nothing with their mana that turn, and they're not making their third land drop here, so interesting keep for the control deck. Okay, so that was a really nice draw, helping us hit our curve. We're going to be able to use this AEther Vial here. But since we have Spell Pierce up, and the opponent is not really developing their board, well, there's a land, but they're trying to top deck lands at this point. They do pay the 2 life. They're already down to 16. I'm going to finish my point that I was making here. I didn't have to play a creature that turn. The opponent had mana up and would certainly have removed them or countered them. Much better for us to just slowly put our creatures in with AEther Vial. We've got a ton of card advantage spells in hand between 2 Branchwalkers and a Silvergill Adept, so we're doing fine on cards. Let's just take this game slowly. The opponent's doing enough damage to themselves with their lands. And there's our 2/2/1 drop. So we'll take AEther Vial up. Okay. So there's another AEther Vial. Seems like a good draw to me. Let's just go to combat and swing with the speaker. See if the opponent wants to use another removal spell. So there's an Electrolyze. Now, this was an interesting spot. I could have countered that, obviously, with the Spell Pierce, which would have prevented the opponent from drawing a card. But I also have a Lord in hand, which, if I Vial him in, is going to just make their Electrolyze useless as a removal spell. So the opponent, I'm going to let him draw a card, but I'm going to get to keep my Spell Pierce, which could be super useful if they try to play like a Johnny Vengeant, or if they try to play an Anger of the Gods that they might have brought in from the sideboard. So I felt very good about that spot. A little bit risky for the opponent to go for the Electrolyze there, especially, since I had the AEther Vial on 2 there. So I'm going to hit for 3. The opponent's going to go down to 13. And just play out the other AEther Vial. Leave up mana for Spell Pierce. Again, the opponent could have something like a Blood Moon, a Planeswalker, Anger of the Gods. I can't counter Supreme Verdict, but the opponent plays a Flooded Strand and just passes the turn. Oh, well, no, they stop on their main phase and they're tapping for Geist. So we feel pretty great about that. We love when the opponent taps low, especially if we have Spell Pierce in hand. We've got Island Walk established, so now Geist is a little bit different from the normal 2/2 that we see in Magic, in the sense that it's a 3-drop. It's a 3-drop that brings 4/4 angels with it, so it's a pretty valuable spell, which means that we don't really mind attacking into it with Lord of Atlantis. If they want to trade with one of our lords, a 3-drop for a 2-drop is a pretty good deal, and it keeps their board empty. So I think we'll keep that one on 2 for now, since we have so many 2-drops. And a Dispel means we're going to be that much more likely just to keep our lands up for the time being. I do bring in a Silvergill this turn, though, because I'd love to draw a 1-drop or a land. So normally, I said earlier that you pretty much always want to play the Branchwalker first. But in this case, I would have loved to have hit a 1-drop to be able to use my AEther Vial here. But land is also good. So, well, there's another Branchwalker. It's an excellent card, and I'm going to be able to play them over the next few turns. But for now, I'm going to leave my mana up like a good tempo player and make sure that I've got access to these counterspells. So Silvergill Adept, even if the opponent doesn't block, is going to be able to be back to block the Geist. If they try to remove the Silvergill, we can always just Spell Pierce or Dispel. So let's be the aggro deck, the beatdown, and swing. So the opponent does go for the block with the Geist, which is fantastic. They're trading their 3-drop for our 2-drop. They have no blocker, so we don't really have to worry about Island Walk. And we've got a potentially overwhelming force with these Branchwalkers. Okay, so I feel great about that trade. The opponent took 3, they're down to 10. We've got 5 cards in hand against the opponent's 5, but we've got 2 creatures on the table and 2 vials, which make them uncounterable. All right, opponent's down to 9, and they just got a basic island. This is an interesting choice, especially since they didn't use it right away. Okay, tapped Hallowed Fountain, and no Supreme Verdict, none of that. So, you know what? This would have been an opportunity to activate Vial during my upkeep to sort of scry my draw and make my draw step better. But you guys have seen the way this game is going. It's better against these control decks to end step creatures, like force them to tap out for like a Wrath. Cursecatcher is an interesting one. And I think it's going to be worth playing it and leaving up only 1 mana to use one of these counterspells. Just because it presents 3 creatures, which in combination with the Lord makes lethal attacks that much more likely. So in this spot, there's really no reason to not swing with both of my guys. So I try to go to combat, but the opponent... Okay, so they go for the Cryptic Command. Now you have a choice between Spell Pierce and Dispel here. Which one do you use, and why? The opponent's trying to tap my creatures, which would prevent 4 damage, and that's a pretty substantial chunk. If I had 2 Lords, I'd be swinging for 8, putting them down to 1. So, seems smart enough for the opponent to use this in this spot. So again, do you use Spell Pierce or Dispel, and why? So I decided to use Spell Pierce because the opponent's playing their lands, and it becomes useless pretty quickly. I mean, yes, it always makes the opponent pay 2 extra mana, which is good for us in the sense that it sort of taps them down. But we really want it to counter something. Dispel can counter only instants, so it can't counter planeswalkers, can't counter sorceries, so it's limited in that respect. But say the opponent plays a land next turn and then plays a Johnny Vengeance. They have 2 mana to pay for Spell Pierce. So let's get value while we can out of the Spell Pierce and counter this Cryptic Command. Now that is a pretty big blowout. It's a definition of a tempo play. The opponent tapped 4 lands to play this powerful modal spell, and we just countered it with our 1-drop. I've still got mana up for another counter spell if I want to do it that way, or I can play Cursecatcher. But for now, I'll just swing for my 4 points of damage. Now playing out the Cursecatcher seems like a cool play, because if the opponent plays like a Supreme Verdict next turn, we can end step 2 Branchwalkers and present lethal. So I kind of want to lure a board wipe in this kind of a situation. So even if so Dispel is better on our turn, right? And our turn is pretty much over. The opponent has no incentive to play instants on their turn. So if I pass the turn with this mana up, the opponent's probably just going to not let me use Dispel anyway. And as I mentioned, the idea of luring the opponent into casting a Supreme Verdict seems kind of nice here. So there's a Plains. Tapping and untapping, being very careful with their mana here. And there it is. So that was the thought process during the game, and they sort of played into it. It's kind of nice. They probably don't have better options, but I sacked the Cursecatcher here just in case somebody's confused and might pay 1 mana for Cursecatcher. There's nothing that says you can't target Supreme Verdict with Cursecatcher's ability. It will never do anything because Cursecatcher says counter target instant or sorcery. But this says it can't be countered. So the opponent does not pay for Cursecatcher wisely. So my creatures die. I'm going to try to go to their end step. And during their end step, I'm going to bring in my 2 Branchwalkers. Now, this one shows... Now, this is a really cool synergy here. If you have 2 vials, you can bring in 1 Branchwalker, and if you see a good card, you leave it on the top, and then if you bring in another Branchwalker, you know that it's going to be a 3/2. So I brought in the second one, and I know that it's going to reveal the same exact card as the previous one. So you don't really need vials for this. It's just if you play one on your turn, if you play a Branchwalker and you see a card that you like and leave it there, your Branchwalker becomes a 3/2. And then if you play another Branchwalker, you know that it's going to be a 3/2. So it's kind of cool the way that works, I think. So let's see. Leaving the Island Walk Lord on top, pass to my turn. And we've even got another Branchwalker and a Dispel in hand, so this is a really dominant position. And at that point, the opponent scooped. So you can see that we fought through a lot of nasty stuff. We had a Lightning Bolt, an Electrolyze, a Geist of Saint Traft, a Cryptic Command, a Supreme Verdict. From our side, Cursecatcher, Lord, Spell Pierce, Cursecatcher, Silvergill, a bunch of little things that all add up. And that's kind of how Merfolk works. It's especially how blue-green Merfolk works. I've been really impressed with this card. The fact that it enters as a 3/2 without Lords is pretty massive. I mean, imagine that I had 2 Silvergills instead of these guys. Now, in this case, it probably still would have gotten the job done because I had a Lord on top. But if I had just had non-Lords on the top, then next turn I would have only been swinging for 2 and 2. As it was, I'm swinging for 6, and there's nothing the opponent can do about it. Even if they had a Bolt for the Lord, they still would have taken 4 from these guys. Wait. If I don't want to get too into it here. I think you guys get what I'm saying. The Branchwalkers entering as 3/2s is a really powerful thing, and allowed me to close this game out pretty quickly. I've been really happy with Kumena's Speaker, but again, I feel like it's more appropriate as a 3-of than as a full playset. We are a really aggressive deck, but we're not the kind of deck that, I don't know if there's really any deck that if a game goes to like turn 6 or more, that you really want to be drawing 1-drops. So we need to hedge a little bit and not run so many Cursecatchers and Kumenas. We saw the value of the Spell Pierce. It countered a Cryptic Command. Just a really great card to have to protect our aggressive strategy. So thanks for watching, guys. The last few videos haven't had active links to my Patreon page, but if you'd like to support my channel, YouTube is back to letting me post my link to Patreon, so please click the link and support the channel. Another way to support the channel is to subscribe if you haven't already. Yeah, so this is just Joe. I'm checking in with my blue-green Merfolk build. Please leave your comments. Let me know how you've been doing with blue-green Merfolk. Tell me what you're hoping to see in Rivals of Ixalan. There's a ton of cards that they could print that would be really great in blue-green Merfolk, so I'm really excited for the set. They've already spoiled the fact that Silvergill Adept is going to be in the set, so it's looking like there's going to be some powerful Merfolk in the next set. So thanks again, guys. Please tune in for the next video, where I'll be back with more blue-green Merfolk action. I'll see you then. Bye.